Okay, so if you turn to page 33 in your chapter 3-4 packet, this is the study guide for the summative assessment. The summative assessment is just a fancy name for the chapter 3 test. So this is going to test your knowledge basically on everything you've learned so far this year, which mostly has been combining like terms, using the distributive property, and then solving equations. So we're going to start with 2a, and 2a has a fraction in it. So whenever we see a fraction, we always think about how we're going to get rid of it. Now, the way we can get rid of this fraction in this equation is to multiply both sides by 5. Now, this is one big term. So when I multiply this by 5, I really only multiply grandma. Remember, the grandchildren stay where they are. Grandma will take care of multiplying them. So notice I multiplied this side by 5 and this side by 5. Here, this 5 and this 5 cancel out, and I'm left with 6 times 5 minus 4g equals, and negative 18 times 5 is negative 90. So you notice now I have an equation without any fractions. Makes this much easier. So I'm going to distribute. I get 30 minus 24g equals negative 90. I'm going to subtract 30 from both sides. Careful to bring down the negative. So negative 24g equals negative 120. Divide by negative 24 on both sides. And I get g equals 5. Okay? Now, to check this, I rewrite my original equation, 6/5 times 5 minus 4g equals negative 18. I plug in 5 for g, so I get 6/5. 5 minus 4 times 5 equals negative 18. 6/5. 4 times 5 is 20. 5 minus 20 is negative 15. When I multiply that, that becomes negative 3. 6 times negative 3 is negative 18, and that's a negative 18. So I know my answer is correct. Okay? So in this particular case, we had a fraction, and we got rid of the fraction by multiplying by the common denominator. Now we're going to look at the next one. On the next one, B, 2/5 x minus 4 equals 12. Now for this one, I do have a fraction, but before I multiply every term by the fraction, I'm going to apply SADMEP. Now the reason here is because sometimes when you think, oh, I'm going to multiply both sides by 5, you remember to multiply this term, you remember to multiply this term, but you forget to multiply that term. So in order to avoid forgetting, let's just add 4 to both sides first before we multiply by anything. So then I'm left with 2/5 x equals 16. Now I'm going to multiply this by 5 and this by 5. And I'm left with 2x equals So multiply by 5, this is 80. Then divide by 2, x equals 40. Okay, now we could have done this differently as long as you're careful. I prefer doing SADMEP. If you ever see a number there and a number there and you want to get on the same side, you either add or subtract. But I could have said, well, I'm just going to multiply both sides by 5. And just make sure you distribute to both terms. So that becomes 2x minus 20 equals 60. Then I add 20 to both sides. 2x equals 80. I divide by 2, divide by 2. X equals 40. So that's another way you could have done it. Okay. And then if you plug 40 back into the check, you will see that it does work. Okay. So now we're going to turn the page and we're going to do yet another fraction. So this is page 34. And this one is 3/8 times 8x minus 16 equals 2/5 times 15x minus 5. Now, I can look at this and say, oh no, two fractions, better clear the fractions. But before I do that, I'm going to see if distributing will clear the fractions. Because if you notice, when the grandchildren are multiples of the denominator, and in this case, 15 and 5 are multiples of 5, and 8 and 16 are multiples of 8. Just by distributing, I will get rid of the fraction. So always look and see, if I distribute, will I get rid of the fractions? Will distributing first make my life easier? If it does, then that's what we're going to do first. So 3/8 times 8, you can either do that in your head, or if that confuses you, do this. And you'll notice the 8's cross out. So this is 3x. 3/8 times 16, that becomes a 1 and a 2, but this is negative. So minus 6. You could also, well, I think that's the best way to do it. You could have multiplied 3 times 16. You would have gotten 48 over 8, negative 48 over 8, which is negative 6. Now, 2/5 times 15. So 2/5 times 15, that becomes a 3. So that's 2 times 3x. Sorry, 2 times 3x is 6x. And 2/5 times negative 5 is negative 2. Okay, so by distributing, notice it cleared the equation of fractions. And that was the easiest way to do it. Now, I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. And I get negative 6 equals 3x minus 2. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. Negative 4 equals 3x. Divide by 3, divide by 3. X equals negative 4/3. Okay, so sometimes you can clear an equation of fractions by distributing. Now, if you went to distribute and you realized that wasn't going to get rid of the fractions, then you can stop and do another strategy. So for number 4, here I have a whole bunch of fractions. So I have no other option than multiplying by the common denominator. So if I look at 1/3, 3/4, 1/2, and I wanted to get a common denominator, the common denominator would be 12. So I'm going to multiply every term by 12. Again, some of you will do it like this and do it in your head. And that's fine, whatever works for you. Some of you will do better by writing it out like this. So you have to figure out if you're the kind who does it better in your head, or if you get confused, you write it out. Some of you get confused by writing too much out. It's personal preference. This 3 and this 12, that makes that a 4. This 4 and this 12, that makes that a 3. This 12 and this 2, that makes that a 6. So this becomes 4x plus 9 equals 6. So now this is much easier to solve since I got rid of all the fractions. Now, another way you could do it is we could say, I'm just going to get a common denominator for all of these. And I know my common denominator should be 12. So instead of doing it this way, I say 1/3 is what over 12? And it's 4 over 12. So I make this 4 over 12x. 3/4 is what over 12? 4 times 3, so this would be 9/12. And 1/2 is what over 12? Well, that's 6 over 12. After you've changed these to all have a common denominator of 12, now you can multiply by 12, because what happens is all the 12s cancel out and you still end up with 4x plus 9 equals 6. Again, you decide what works best for you. If you really hate fractions, I think sometimes changing these all to a common denominator first and then multiplying by the common denominator is the best strategy. So now I'm going to subtract 9, and I get 4x equals -3. Divide by 4, divide by 4, x equals -3/4. Okay? So sometimes you do have to multiply by the common denominator, and sometimes it's easier to change every fraction to have a common denominator. Okay, now, number 5 is decimals. So a lot of times when we have decimals, what's easier is get rid of the decimals, and we do that by multiplying by the common denominator, so to speak. Because if you read 0.8 properly, it's 8/10 x plus 1 equals 21 minus 2/10 x. So my denominator here is a 10. So if I multiply every term by 10, I'll get rid of my decimal. Now, the most common mistake here is you forget to multiply the non-decimals, but you have to multiply every term. Now, when you multiply by 10, you really move your decimal 1 to the right. Okay? So this becomes 8x plus 10 equals 210 minus 2x. So what I did here is no more decimals, and I think everybody does better without decimals. So now I'm going to add 2x to both sides. I get 10x plus 10 equals 210. Subtract 10 from both sides, and we get 10x equals 200. Divide by 10, and we get 20. So x equals 20. Okay, so we clear of decimals by reading your decimals properly, and you know whether you should multiply by 10, 100, or 1,000. Okay? So we're going to end this video, and I'll do another video for the other pages.